Un saluto di benvenuto a tutti voi in questa occasione davvero speciale. Questa è una giornata in cui, che è stata di studio stamattina per più di 20 giovani studiosi di scultura e di medagliistica e non solo. E oggi questa invece conferenza a due voci è dedicata e aperta al pubblico. Volevo dire solo due cose. È dedicata naturalmente la giornata alla collezione che Mario Scaglia ha voluto destinare all'Accademia Carrara, una collezione molto articolata che ha trovato nel nuovo allestimento anche una sua rappresentatività. Ma quello che l'ingegnere ha costruito intorno a questa donazione è anche di più. Oltre agli oggetti preziosi che conserviamo, che conserveremo quindi per sempre, ha anche dato delle indicazioni molto precise da conoscitore da un lato e dall'altro da collezionista che ha una responsabilità culturale su quello che ha raccolto e adesso ha donato. Allora, il primo punto è che la collezione è stata dotata di una biblioteca specializzata, anche questa di altissima qualità, che è stata messa a disposizione di chi voglia consultare, cioè lo studio, l'approfondimento di questi oggetti delle nostre collezioni sono anche dotati degli strumenti di studio. Infatti stamani a un certo punto gli studiosi che sono rimasti con noi e hanno visitato questa sala dedicata alla biblioteca hanno immediatamente avuto bisogno di prendere alcuni di questi libri e di metterli a confronto con gli oggetti. E la seconda cosa che mi piace sottolineare è che l'ingegnere, che ha donato tra l'altro non solo la raccolta di medaglie e di placchette, ma anche il capolavoro di Evaristo Baschenis che vedete qui, il ragazzo con cesto di pane, ha anche dotato le sue raccolte di cataloghi scientifici. Non solo quindi ha offerto al museo questa opportunità, ma anche ha dotato il museo di tutti quegli strumenti che di solito i musei faticano poi a realizzare. Quindi la vicenda è che da qui in avanti è tutta in discesa. L'idea e la cosa importante è che questa collezione vada valorizzata. Questo è il primo appuntamento e la prima occasione in cui chiamare a una partecipazione su questa forma d'arte. Il museo ha un tratto identitario che è quello di essere un museo di collezioni. Collezionisti che hanno raccolto per tutta la vita opere d'arte e che alla fine della loro esistenza, nel caso dell'ingegner Scaglia prima, ha deciso di condividere questa passione con la comunità. Quindi questo è un aspetto che di nuovo questa donazione così importante sottolinea. La seconda è la qualità delle nostre raccolte e anche in questo caso la raccolta donata dall'ingegner Scaglia ha sotto questo profilo una qualità assoluta perché è stato un suo criterio di selezione, solo medaglie e placchette di assoluta qualità. E l'ultimo punto che mi piace sottolineare per poi lasciare a Giulia Zaccariotto, che è conservatore del museo dell'Accademia Carrara, con la destinazione, la funzione di essere conservatore della scultura, delle arti applicate e naturalmente delle raccolte di Mario Scaglia, di medaglie e di placchette. La cosa molto importante, che è stato un altro criterio che ha guidato la donazione, è che gli oggetti donati, le opere d'arte donate, aggiungessero alle straordinarie collezioni della Carrara. E sia per quanto riguarda questo dipinto, vedete in questa sala le opere di Bascheris, ma questo è un dipinto di figura che le collezioni non avevano ed è un capolavoro del Seicento lombardo, ma la collezione di medaglie e di placchette aggiunge un ambito che il museo non aveva. Quindi devo dire un disegno nei quali siamo stati guidati appunto da Mario Scaglia, ma che è assolutamente convincente per noi, ma credo lo sarebbe per qualsiasi museo che svolga il suo lavoro di condivisione con il pubblico, ma anche di conoscenza di quello che conserva. Alla fine di questa nostra conservazione, con degli ospiti studiosi di altissimo livello, Warren ed Atwood, che ringrazio per essere qui, per aver voluto partecipare a questo nostro incontro, abbiamo immaginato un dialogo che abbiamo costruito nel tempo con l'ingegnere, che ha molto da raccontare, e quindi abbiamo intervistato, e una sintesi di queste nostre conversazioni con lui, che si sono svolte alcuni mesi fa, vi verranno restituite a conclusione di questo nostro pomeriggio. Grazie, a te Giulia.
Sì, uso questo, tanto sì. Grazie Cristina anche per l'opportunità, insomma, di organizzare questa prima giornata, che sarà la prima di un corso che durerà, speriamo per sempre, ma tutti gli anni noi terremo una giornata dedicata alle collezioni di scultura donate da Scaglia. Oggi è stata una sorta di una giornata d'inizio, un kick-off di questo nostro progetto, perché abbiamo avuto questa mattina, appunto come diceva Cristina, 25 studiosi di scultura, un po' da tutta Europa, perché ci sono persone che sono venute anche dall'estero, e abbiamo mostrato loro questi nuovi strumenti che possiamo offrire loro per studiare, e quindi abbiamo offerto loro la possibilità di vedere in anteprima la biblioteca che c'è al piano di sotto, una piccola biblioteca ma molto completa per lo studio di scultura e arti applicate, medaglie e placchette. Io in questa giornata vi porto anche un po' i saluti di tanti musei di tutto il mondo con cui stiamo collaborando, perché abbiamo proprio un filo diretto legato a queste raccolte, la Free Collection di New York, la National Gallery di Washington, ma anche i musei Louvre, la Bibliothèque Nationale de France. E sono tutte persone che ci hanno mandato i loro saluti, non sono potute essere presenti, ma con cui collaboreremo in futuro. Abbiamo scelto di iniziare questo study day con due dei massimi studiosi di scultura viventi su questi temi, due eredi di quella che è la tradizione dello studio anglosassone degli oggetti di bronzo di piccolo formato, perché è la tradizione anglosassone quella che ha cominciato lo studio di questi oggetti, la catalogazione delle monete antiche, come la catalogazione delle medaglie e delle placchette. Ne introdurrò uno alla volta, adesso vi racconterò chi è Philip Atwood. Philip Atwood adesso è il presidente del FIDEM, che è la Federazione Internazionale dell'Arte della Medaglia, che ha da pochissimo concluso il suo congresso annuale a Firenze, quest'anno, un mese fa, con la mostra delle medaglie moderne e con 3 giorni, forse 4 giorni di interventi legati appunto alle medaglie moderne e antiche. Io ho avuto l'opportunità di parlare e di presentare il nostro allestimento della collezione Scaglia al FIDEM, ma Philip Atwood è anche nel board della British Art Medal Society, che è una società appunto anglosassone molto attiva nello studio della medaglia e che pubblica la rivista The Medal, che è una delle riviste di settore più importanti. È stato però per moltissimi anni il direttore del dipartimento di Coins and Medals, quindi di medaglie e monete, del British Museum di Londra. ha scritto quello che è, diciamo, il catalogo fondamentale che oggi usiamo tutti i giorni noi che studiamo medaglie cinquecentesche, ovvero le medaglie italiane delle collezioni inglesi dal 1530 al 1600, che è una sorta di continuazione ideale di quello che è il primo grandissimo studio sulle medaglie rinascimentali che fece George Francis Hill e che pubblicò nel 1930. Atwood infatti ha cominciato a lavorare sotto la guida di Hill al British Museum. Lascio la parola a lui e vi farà una panoramica sulla medaglia rinascimentale.
Thank you very much, Christina and Julia, for that introduction. I'm going to take a slightly sideways glance at medals over the next 45 minutes. And what I intend to do is to ask two questions. Firstly, why are medals so appealing? What is it about the medium that has meant that it has continued to thrive in an unbroken line of descent from the first medals of the Italian Renaissance to today? On the face of it, there is no obvious reason why the particular format of the medal should have thrived over the centuries. And secondly, why are medals not more popular than they are? Ever since the late 19th century, there has been a tendency to couch discussions of medals in terms of disappointment. The medal societies that have existed in various countries, particularly in Western Europe since that time, have been set up in an attempt to redress what has been perceived to be a general lack of interest in medals. Or at least in the sort of medals the founders of these societies deem to be the correct form. The tendency towards this thinking is still found today, as authors, myself included, have lamented that medals are not better understood than they are and not more widespread. Why should there be a certain resistance to embracing the medal? And I shall take this second point first, beginning with factors that I think may have held medals back, and then move on to the first point, discussing some of the reasons that have, in another sense, made the medallic form such a success story, arguments that will perhaps be more familiar to this audience. But first of all, why have I chosen Cellini's medal of Moses striking the rock that brings forth water? It is because I think that in a way, this medal, or rather this particular example of it, exemplifies both the possibilities and the pitfalls associated with medals. The extraordinary achievement of a complex composition and virtuoso die engraving combined with partial failure when it came to the striking. You can see this failure particularly in the shadow of the prophet's profile, which gives the appearance of a second figure standing by his side, and also in the duplication of the beaded border around the edge of the medal. However, viewed in another way, and quite incidentally, the double striking adds to the vibrancy of the medal. It is as though Moses striking the rock has caused the medal itself to reverberate. Repeated lines are how modern-day cartoonists often suggest movement, and that is what we have here. This is, of course, an accident, a fault caused by the blank moving between strikes, but it illustrates how a weakness can also be a strength. And it also offers an interesting example of the direct relationship that can exist between a medal as a physical object and its subject matter. And at the end of this talk, I shall revert to this subject of medals embodying ideas rather than just illustrating them. So, as I say, I will begin by thinking a little bit about why medals, what may have held medals back. Since the 19th century, art historians have been fairly unanimous in declaring the 15th century in Italy as the golden age of medals. It is interesting to note, however, that this does not seem to have translated into large numbers of medals being made. Now, I'm very aware that rates of survival are generally extremely misleading. But, as I pointed out in the introduction to my catalogue of 16th century medals in British collections, to judge from known examples, in Italy in the 15th and early 16th century, medals were being made at an annual rate of about 13. This increased in the second half of the 16th century, a phenomenon that provoked lamentations that medals were now portraying people who did not deserve to be memorialised in this way, and caused Leone to declare in a letter written in 1561 that everyone was now having themselves portrayed. But it goes without saying that everyone wasn't having themselves a medal made. And one can even think of individuals prominent in the arts and antiquarianism who do not appear in this format. Even if surviving medals represent only a fraction of those that were produced, as they surely do, it is hard not to conclude that many people in Italy at this time were either oblivious or resistant to medals, as indeed there are nowadays throughout the Western world, in spite of the best endeavours of organisations such as FIDEM. Why might this be the case? It is, I think, interesting to consider here one of the essential characteristics of most medals, and that is their circularity. When I began to contemplate this point, I was sitting in my living room and I looked around for circles. Now, not everyone may have bicycles and tennis balls in their living room, but this happened to be the case with me on this occasion, and it serves my purpose well, as it seems to me that these objects all combine to give us some indication of how circles may be perceived. The wheel and the ball, objects that have instability built into them. And then there is perhaps the most slippery of all, time. In contrast to this, rectangular objects are firstly more ubiquitous and secondly inherently more stable. Tables, paintings, and to these one could add prints, and screens, nowadays not only television screens but of course also computer screens, which have inherited their rectangularity from the printed page, and to go back further in time, from the manuscript. It is by means of the rectangle that most information is assimilated, and it is in a rectangular format that many art objects are viewed. And this, I suggest, may have created a subconscious expectation in the human brain, which has become instinctively receptive to information conveyed in rectangular form, whilst at the same time being uncertain in its responses to circles. What may be described as a resistance to the circular format in a medallic context is nicely illustrated by an anecdote concerning the late 19th century French medallist Oscar Rotti, about which I, as well others, have written. This anecdote was recorded by the French art critic Paul Xell in an article that appeared in the periodical Art et Décoration in 1904. And in the article, he recalled Rotti telling him of a revelation that he had some 20 years earlier, which had made him wake his wife up in the middle of the night with the exclamation, "J'ai trouvé, I have found it." "What have you found?" his wife asked. "The way to make money," he replied. "Hum," was the response. This is the middle of the night, remember. The artist, we are told, went on, "There is no need to go hum, just listen. Medals up to now have been made circular, haven't they? Well, I'm going to make them square. The public doesn't look at circular medals, but it will look at square medals, because that will surprise them, and they'll order them from me. So the word used by Rotti was carré, square, but the medals that he made from the mid-1880s were rectangular, and it is clear that this is what he was thinking of in his nighttime revelation. So this is a cast example bearing a portrait of his son, Maurice, but he also produced many struck medals in this format, including various well-known advertising medals and a famous medal commemorating the funeral of the French president Sadi Carnot. What brought about this sudden insight on Rotti's part regarding circular and rectangular forms he does not reveal. But it is interesting to note that Émile Molyneux's important catalogue of Renaissance plaquettes was published at this time, indeed in 1886, the very year in which Rotti made the medal that you see here. That the artist knew about such works is made clear by his reference, reported by Sell, to, quote, plaquettes as they were modelled by the medalists of the Renaissance. Now, other artists followed suit, and indeed French medalists began to produce works in a variety of shapes. According to Gzell, this innovation was successful in rescuing Rotti from poverty and also in encouraging a wider interest in medals. A society, the Société des Amis de la Médaille, was formed in 1899. But its membership, fixed at a maximum of 500, never reached more than 300, and by 1910, the year it issued its last medals, it had declined to 123. Perhaps it should have issued more rectangular medals. The associations that circles bring with them are of course more profound than tennis balls and bicycle wheels, and it would take considerably more time than we have this afternoon to investigate them all. A good starting point would be the celestial bodies, the sun and the moon, life-giving forces that have been worshipped for millennia. It should also be noted that concepts as wide-ranging as eternity, wholeness and unity have been envisioned as circles. But the point here is that these examples convert the circle into a metaphysical construct with otherworldly connotations. The mysterious power of the circle is graphically illustrated in this painting by the eminent late 19th century British painter J.W. Waterhouse, in which sacred and mundane spaces are delineated by the drawing of a circle. This old established practice has given its name not only to Waterhouse's painting, but to the British Magicians' Society, the Magic Circle, founded in 1905 and still thriving today. Essentially, though, the circle is simply a geometric entity, and this is how it is considered by, for example, Alberti in his book on painting. However, the central place that it occupies in his architectural ideas as an ideal form elevates it to something much more. Moreover, the unique properties of the circle, a form that consists of one continuous curving line, uninterrupted by angles, its edge always at equal distance from its centre, have given rise to stories that add to its mystique. Perhaps best known is the story of Giotto and the drawing that he made for Pope Benedict XI, as related by Vasari, a story that sets the ability to draw a circle as the defining characteristic of a great artist. And following Alberti, the painter Raphael, in a letter to Pope Leo X, written in 1519, declared to, quote, "The perfection of the circle pleases the eye, and it can be observed that nature almost never tends towards any other form." Is it perhaps the case that adulation of this sort has, in a sense, been counterproductive, helping to give the circle a status that distances it from individuals whose lives proceed on a less exalted plane? However, if the perfection implicit in the circle can provoke a certain wariness, the circle can also have wholly negative connotations as a symbol of uncertainty. And here is an example taken from a medal. And I should warn you at this point that I will generally be showing just one side of each medal, as I will be talking about the reverses. And so abandoning my normal practice of showing both sides to indicate that medals are indeed two-sided objects. But the point is here that the wheel has a long history, as seen here, as a symbol of the arbitrary nature of fate. This is the reverse of a medal of Daniele de Anna, a member of a Flemish family of merchants resident in Venice in the mid-16th century. The figure climbing the wheel, with her wildly flapping drapery and hair, and arms outstretched as if trying desperately to maintain her balance, seems very precarious indeed. And it is clear that very shortly there is only one direction in which she can go, and that is downward. It is instructive to compare her with the accompanying figure, who directs events and sits securely on a square block, a very solid structure that forms a striking contrast with the turning wheel that dominates the scene. Turning our attention from two-dimensional circles such as this, as exemplified by the wheel, to three dimensions, the ball or sphere, the imagery elicits similar concerns. Fortune, balanced on her globe, is one of the standard tropes of emblematic imagery. Here she is, for example, in Jacopo Ligozzi's late 16th century painting, with gold coins among the possibilities on the left, whilst on the other side an hourglass and rosebud suggests the inexorable nature of time and death as the ultimate human fate. The globe on which the figure stands may be seen as representing the world over which fortune reigns, but it also suggests its unpredictability. Medals, too, offer many examples of this sort of iconography, although the celebratory nature of medals led to a tendency to replace the cautionary meaning that we see here, the memento mori, with images of a capricious fortune overcome by individual merit. To go back 100 years, Antico's medal of Gianfrancesco Gonzaga offers an example of this more positive gloss. Again, fortune stands on a globe that appears to represent the earth, but here, as the legend tells us, she is Fortuna Victrix, conquering fate. The exact identities of the two other figures have been disputed by scholars, although Mars and Minerva, deities respectively of war and of learning, and the arts, would seem to be the most likely candidates. It is clear from this and from the inscription that this reverse must be intended as a compliment to Gonzaga, seemingly identifying him as both a successful condottiere and also a cultivated prince. The implication of the globe is that this can never have been a certainty, and that it was therefore through his personal qualities that Gonzaga achieved this success. At this relatively late stage in his life, his fortune is fixed. This idea of the individual being in control of fortune is taken up half a century later in this medal made by an unidentified artist. The portrait is of Gregorio Magalotti, who, as the inscription tells us, was Bishop of Chiusi. As with Leone Leoni's medal of Daniele de Anna, this reverse is again an exercise in contrasts. On the one hand, fortune is balanced on a globe floating on the waves and blown wherever it may be by the wind that fills the sail. The legend, though, stat robur, the oak tree stands, is in clear contradiction of this image. Magalotti, by force of character, it suggests, has withstood the whims of fortune. Now, this medal, I think, must have been made by a Bolognese artist, certainly by an artist from Bologna. The sculptor Giovanni Zacchi, and made at about the same time as the Magalotti medal, are the two medals whose reverses you see here. The obverse of the left-hand medal carries a portrait of the man who would become Pope Julius III, whilst the lively scene on the reverse, which you see here, shows Prudence, identified by the snake that appears below her, seizing the hair of a fleeing fortune balanced on a globe. As you can see, the precariousness of fortune is underlined by what appears to be a rough sea, not dissimilar to the sea of the Magalotti medal. But here its instability is emphasised by the marked contrast with the solid ground on which prudence stands. The contrast the artist has created is between the undulating curves of the waves and the straight lines and angularity of the solid earth. The other medal by Zacchi that you see here has on its obverse the Venetian Doge Andrea Gritti. Here, the figure of fortune on the reverse holds a cornucopia and a rudder, and around the globe is entwined a three-headed monster. Again, the precise meaning of this reverse has been the subject of scholarly debate, but two uncontroversial observations can, I think, be made. Firstly, that the monster, whatever its exact identity, has the effect of echoing the negative connotations associated with the globe. And secondly, that fortune can be directed by someone like Gritti, who, using the rudder to steer his way, arrives at the rewards symbolised by the cornucopia. In these examples, through its association with an individual on a medal, fortune becomes a force that has been conquered rather than a symbolic warning, as in paintings such as that by Ligozzi and in numerous prints. These medals depend on a direct contrast between the virtuous individual placed on the obverse and the circle, the uncertain world that he or she has successfully navigated. Another medal that is convincingly attributed to Zacchi dispenses with the figure of fortune, but retains the globe tossed about on a stormy sea. Again, the globe and the sea are juxtaposed with the snake, to which are added the scales of justice, which you can see gripped in the snake's mouth. Above, threatening clouds loom over the whole scene. Given the relative scales of the various parts of the composition and the comparative emphasis given to each element, wisdom and justice would appear to be faced with quite a struggle. And this is something also suggested by the accompanying legend, Lacrimarum fluctus et amoris, a flood of tears and of love. Although suggestions have been made, the nature of the unequal struggle that is referred to here is unknown. But in the present context, what is of interest is the artist's decision to dispense with the figure of fortune entirely and to allow the globe to act as a metonym for all the uncertainty that that figure implies. So in these examples, we have seen how the circle and its three-dimensional counterpart, the sphere, are used by artists to signify that which is not fixed and which is therefore potentially disquieting. In Leone's Hannah medal, we have seen a circle in the form of a wheel contrasted with a square block as symbols respectively of instability and solidity. Such blocks appear in other medals, and it is instructive to look at one example, Jacopo da Trezzo's celebrated medal of Queen Mary Tudor. And the example I show here is the reverse of the spectacular gold medal in the British Museum. In this very complex composition, a figure of peace is setting fire to a pile of arms while holding aloft the palm branch of victory and the olive branch of peace. To the right, a group of contented figures assemble in a presumably Roman Catholic temple, while to the left, another group, presumably Protestant, are subjected to wind, rain, and hail. The legend explains that the former group are being given peace, whilst the trials they are suffering are saving the latter from their blindness. That this refers to the situation in England, an island nation, is indicated by this sea in the foreground. But the detail that I want to concentrate on particularly is the square block placed under the throne on which peace is seated. And if you look carefully, you can see that carved on one side of this block is a pair of clasped hands, while placed just in front of it are a pair of scales. The function of this block is to make the claim that Mary's reign is based on stability. It is the solid foundation on which the piece that she is alleged to have brought about is said to be based. Its essential properties, rather surprisingly, given the scenes above, being unity, symbolised by the clasped hands, and a close association with justice, the scales. This use of a square or rectangular block to symbolise a solid basis is a common device and is often found in a religious context. And to take a later example at random, one that I came across earlier this year, here is the figure of religion on the back of William the Silent's tomb in Delft. The block on which the figure firmly places her foot is labelled unequivocally Christ, thereby emphasising the direct importance placed by Protestantism on the teaching of Christ without intermediaries. Of course, unlike examples such as this, what artists who make medals are doing is to place a rectangular form within a circle. And sometimes it seems that they are deliberately exploiting this contrast. So looking at the reverse of Jacopo da Trezzo's medal of Isabella Capua Gonzaga, which is on display just in the next room, we see the subject of the medal dressed as a Vestal Virgin, chastely and humbly, as the legend has it, making a sacrifice at a burning altar. On some examples of this medal, the side of the altar facing us is inscribed Nubi Fugo, to the cloud chaser, below an image of the sun breaking through clouds. But on others, such as the one you see here, and those in the British Museum and the Victorian Albert Museum, the side of the altar is left blank. The quality of these pieces suggests that they are early casts, and it would seem at least the possibility that the artist made the decision to sacrifice specificity of meaning and took some cast before adding the cloud-chasing sun. Perhaps we can speculate that the contrast between the circular outline of the medal and the stark rectangular space within it played some part in this decision. Certainly, modern-day designers seem to enjoy playing with circles and rectangles. In this example, taken from the British periodical The Guardian Weekly just a couple of years ago, a designer has decided, at the bottom there, to convert a rectangular painting into a circular form. A decision which on the face of it is very peculiar, I would suggest, but which is designed to catch and then retain the attention of the reader/viewer. The converse to this idea can be found in some medal books and exhibitions, where enlargements of details from medals may be used to draw in the viewer who is more used to looking at rectangles. These can take the form of whole pages of a book with the images bled off the edge, or large-scale exhibition panels showing details of medals. And I know that I myself have used this device in the past, and in my experience, it can be very effective in getting people to actually look. In contrast to this, the application of the circle on the page that you see here succeeds because of its unexpectedness. Moreover, the concept of instability does not apply, as the circle is fixed on the rectangular page. And this brings us to the second characteristic of medals that we should consider, their handheld nature. While this is generally held to be one of the very positive properties of the medal, could this combine with its circular format to encourage the ambivalence that I've been discussing? There are, of course, other circular art forms. There are painted tondi, although I think it's interesting to note that as a significant genre, these hardly lasted much into the 16th century, and we might also note that many were later given square frames. But the important point here is that the circular work of art was generally fixed before the viewer on a wall, a fate that often befell even birth trays, deschi da parto. And architectural medallions were, of course, even more static. It is true that coins are also held in the hand, but coins have a material function that places them in a different category. They do not ask to be considered in any discriminatory sense. Indeed, We need hardly look at coins in order to use them. Certainly in past times, the circulation of coins from different lands in the same location could mean that significantly more scrutiny was often required, and neatly presented cases of scales, weights, and conversion tables were manufactured for the purpose of assisting this process. Yet it remains the case that these were very practical concerns. Medals have always had practical functions, but these have not been so easily defined as those of coins, to which commercial exchange has given an unquestionable and very concrete raison d'etre. Coins do not demand to be viewed in the same way as medals, which in this respect must be placed in a similar category to paintings and other works of art. And those works are generally fixed in space, whereas medals float freely and thereby give the viewer total agency over how they are to be approached. And this places a responsibility on the viewer that can perhaps be disconcerting. Okay, so much for what may have held medals back. We shall now turn to what it might be that has ensured that medals have continued to be made for nearly 600 years. And here we are on ground that may be more familiar to this audience. The way that the medal made itself felt within certain coteries can be illustrated through emblem books. Whereas the images that appeared in the earliest emblem books by Alciato and others took their cue from the customary format of the print and appeared within rectangular frames, and remained committed to that format through successive editions. By the early 17th century, Tipotius was placing them in circles so that the emblem becomes a very close relative of the medal reverse. And as you may be able to see from his top right image here, with Tipotius, the influence could be very direct, for this is his version, a somewhat fanciful version, of the reverse of Jacopo da Trezzo's medal of Mary Tudor, which we have already seen. What then are the characteristics of the medals that have ensured its continuing appeal? First of all, we can mention its economy of means, the way in which quite complex ideas can be conveyed in a very small compass. Whatever the meaning of the medal by Alfonso Ruspagliari that you see here on the left, and certainly the title that I've given it here is very inadequate, it is notable that a message that would have been understood in mid-16th century Reggio, or would perhaps have been the subject of debate, as it still is today, is conveyed by means of distilling the essential element that can be seen in other media, such as the two paintings shown here, and condensed into just 6.5 centimetres. The enigmatic nature of this medal brings us to another quality of medals, their flexibility. Their ability on the one hand to carry abstruse designs that tease the viewer, as we see in so many Renaissance medals and seem to see here, or on the other hand to hammer their message home directly and forcefully. Medals can impart information, but importantly, they can also withhold it. The medal that you see here has no explanatory text, leaving us to ponder what exactly it was that the artist wished to communicate. The absence of a name would suggest that this is not intended primarily as a portrait, but whether there is a likeness to a living person, which would have been recognizable at the time, it is impossible to say. What I think it does show is that this medal was intended for a relatively closely knit circle of individuals who would either understand or debate its meaning. By contrast, most medals do, of course, name their subjects. Others, though, such as this piece, which seems to be 16th century Italian, or perhaps French, are more sparing with the information that they give. As you can see, the legend is confined to the age of the individual portrayed, but just as we can learn from the presence of this information, I think that we can also learn from the absence of other information. As we are told that this man is age 56, he must be an actual living or recently dead individual. The important thing for the artist was to specify his age, that is, either to indicate how old he was when he died, or to place the production of the medal at a certain time. The lack of a name suggests that, again, the medal was made for a relatively small audience who would not need to be told who he was. And in a very different context, I've often found when looking through old family photographs that in turning over a photograph there is just a scrawled date and possibly a place name, but nothing else. The names of the people in the photograph are not given. This can be infuriating, but the point is that at the time the photograph was inscribed, there was no need to identify the people as they were so familiar to the viewer. Something, I would suggest, not altogether dissimilar is the case with paintings, such as this one by Lorenzo Lotto, showing a man who is, we are told, 37 years old, and for whom the image of a Cupid balanced on scales on the left, and also perhaps the hand gestures, would have acted as further identifiers. Likewise, with medals such as the one we see here, the people for whom they were intended must have been able to identify the person portrayed without being told. In the case of this man, his peculiar hat and his gown might suggest that the medal was commissioned for associates in a particular organisation. For paintings such as the Lotto, which, unless copies were required, are unique works destined for a specific place, the audience would be limited to those with access to that place. For medals, the audience must also have been restricted. But as medals are multiples and easily transportable, this restriction would have had to be applied differently. This, I would suggest, could have been done only by limiting the size of the edition to a group of people whom we may term insiders. Now, in contrast to the medals shown here, others, by far the greater number, have legends that give not only the name of the subject, but also their titles and achievements, their claims to high status and virtuous behaviour. This ability to provide, or alternatively to withhold information, is, as I say, one of the defining characteristics of the medal. Although this medal and the Ruspiggiari medal that we saw before are uniface, the majority are, as we all know, two-sided. And this is another key characteristic of the medal that we must again consider, for it is in this that much of their power lies. Take as an example this painting and this medal of the banker and patron of the arts Bindo Altoviti, both made at about the same time, when Altoviti was around 60 years old. As you can see, both contain the same allegory, showing a figure of fortitude embracing a column surrounded by a stormy sea. In the painting, Altoviti gestures towards the figure, who appears to be seen through a window. But the relationship of the two is uneasy, as different scales and different realities are combined into one image. The presentation of the same imagery on the medal resolves the contradictions seen in the painting by separating the two elements, the portrait and the allegory, whilst at the same time keeping them together. The awkward disjunction visible in the painting disappears. Distancing the portrait and the allegory in this way, as medals often do, also introduces a temporal aspect to the experience of looking, which not only promotes engagement with the work, but also stimulates thought in a way that is not possible with paintings such as the one we see here. The harnessing of time is a feature that literally adds another dimension to the majority of medals, as their full meaning cannot be assimilated in one gaze, but requires action on the part of the viewer. If, as I have suggested earlier, this can be disconcerting, it can also be extraordinarily compelling for those willing to take up the challenge. Of course, medals are far from being the only artworks to possess the quality of two-sidedness. In the 15th and 16th centuries, deschi da parto had two painted sides. Closer to medals are those portraits of the same period that were provided with reverses, which furnish an emblematic commentary on the person portrayed, or give the age. And of course, there is one example of that in the medal room here. There are plenty of other famous examples. Leonardo's portrait of Ginevra de' Benci in Washington, Piero della Francesca's twin portraits of Federico da Montefeltro and Battista Sforza of about the same time in the Uffizi, or a century later, Alessandro Allori's painting of Bianca Capella in the same gallery. But a rather different example of a two-sided painting is Bronzino's portrait of the dwarf Morgante, now on display in Florence's Pitti Palace, which I'm sure you will all know. Painted around the middle of the 16th century, the obverse shows Morgante from the front as if about to begin a bird hunt, and the reverse shows him from the back at a different moment in the hunt. The label currently accompanying the painting in the gallery suggests that it relates to the contemporary debate concerning the primacy of painting or sculpture. But there seems to me to be a much closer parallel with medals, both in the play between front and back, the element of surprise in moving from one side to the other, and the very binary nature of the onlooker's temporal experience. The difference between paintings, even one such as this though, between paintings is again the handheld nature of the medal. Paintings might have reverses or indeed covers, but not being handheld, the absence of direct physical contact means that they can never have the same immediacy or potency as the medal. Another feature of medals to have added to their allure over the centuries is their complexity, the many connections they can make, the ideas they can evoke, the messages they can convey through their combination of imagery and text, of material, sometimes precious, and high-minded sentiments. And this in turn has led them to be co-opted into other media, and I think that this is one of the principal ways in which they have remained a vibrant element in Western culture. For even those individuals who have had no direct experience of actual medals will have encountered them in other forms. And I've talked about this before in the presentation I gave to the British Art Medal Society, but I will just give a few examples here to make the point. Here we see medals as one of the symbols of the vanity of earthly life, along with a silver jar, a skull, a book containing a print of the philosopher Democritus with inscriptions referring to the transience of life, a watch, and of course inevitably coins. And this detail shows the two medals. On the left, the reverse of Jan Roetier's medal of 1672 celebrating the elevation of the Earl of Lauderdale to a dukedom, and on the right, another medal by Roetier showing Charles II. And this latter was created as a reward for those who had taken a prominent role in the Second Anglo-Dutch War of 1665-7, hence the gold chain. The choice of medals here would seem to be very deliberate. One commemorating an earthly title, the dukedom, and the other denoting service to an earthly rather than to a heavenly king. They are of precious metals, silver and gold, with the gold chain attached to the Charles II, adding substantially to its value. The presence here of these medals shows that Van Roostraten had grasped how well suited medals were to carry the vanitas message. More generally, the picture shows very clearly that by this point it was very well understood that medals could have a significance beyond, and indeed at variance with their original immediate function. Their original meaning is here turned against them. Other paintings include medals with more positive associations. Paintings of collectors' cabinets often include medals as an indication of erudition. Other pictures find different ways to suggest a familiarity with antiquity. Here is a portrait of Artemisia Gentileschi by the French artist Simon Vouet, painted when he was based in Rome. And as you can see, Gentileschi is shown wearing a gold medal suspended from a gold chain, similar to the one we have just seen in the Van Roostraten painting. And many of you will doubtless recognize the medal, of which I show a detail, I show the original here. It is, of course, the reverse of a medal attributed to Alessandro Cesati, which shows on its obverse the 4th century BC Queen Artemisia II of Caria. It was this Artemisia who built the famous mausoleum at Halicarnassus for her husband Mausolus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, hence the structure on the reverse, identified below by the Greek word mausoleum. By showing the reverse rather than the obverse, Vouet has created a puzzle that has to be unravelled. Moreover, he has suggested marital devotion as one of Gentileschi's qualities, and at the same time elevated her through the allusion to antiquity. The date of 1550 given here for the medal is very approximate, but it must have been made around 60 to 80 years before Vouet produced the painting. So once again, a medal is being used in a way that cannot have been anticipated by its creator. The use of medals to associate a contemporary individual with the classical world is to be found in other media. For example, this dish incorporates medals of figures from antiquity made by Valerio Belli in the 1520s or 1530s. Their obverses visible on the outside and their reverses on the inside. In the left-hand image, you can see the Spartan leader Lycurgus in the centre and Helen of Troy to the left behind him. The reverses of the medals appear on the interior. The central medal at the base of the dish carries a portrait of the early 17th century Lithuanian Cardinal Eustachius Horowitz, who may have commissioned the dish. The inclusion of Belli's medals intended to draw attention to his antiquarian interests. Medal reverses are well placed to give additional meaning to other types of objects. It is hardly surprising to find French victories displayed on cabinets intended to hold Louis XIV's collection of medals. More surprising is that the example you see here, a later version, should have been inquired by the Prince Regent, the future British King George IV, in 1813, a time at which Britain was at war with France. The history of these objects is more straightforward. The medals here are from a series of 40 medals celebrating British victories in the Napoleonic Wars issued in 1820. And here you see them as the principal decoration of 2 identical mobile decanter holders produced by the Birmingham manufacturer Edward Thomason as a present for George IV. So they would stand on the dining table and be wheeled up and down so that people could help themselves to a drink. The 11 medals are around the edge are uniface and slightly curved, while there is another medal in the base. And George IV very soon handed these over to the Duke of Wellington, who appreciated them seemingly a lot more, and they still belong. They're still there at Stratfield-Say, the house of still belonging to the present Duke of Wellington. A similar idea on a much grander scale can be seen at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, where the reverses of medals commemorating Napoleonic battles made by the Russian artist Fyodor Tolstoy from 1813 on are incorporated into the architecture of the Alexander Hall, named after Alexander I, the Russian Tsar during the Napoleonic Wars. And the obverse of the Tolstoy's medallic series, showing Alexander himself, appears at the end of the room. Whilst the portrait that you see here is a form of self-aggrandizement, obverses have frequently been used to convey contemporary allegiances. We are familiar with painted portraits of people wearing medals, but they can also be found in a variety of other media. For example, the gilt medal in the centre of this Portuguese silver dish shows Philip III of Spain. And this self-portrait shows the artist not wearing but holding a massive medal of Augustus III, King of Poland. The use of portrait medals on funerary monuments is also a common phenomenon. Here are two examples from Westminster Abbey in London. Portraying the deceased person in this way places them in a sphere very distinct and very distant from mundane existence. In the left-hand example, the paraphernalia of naval officer Henry Priestman's earthly life is piled up below, whilst the man himself is isolated in the medal that is made to appear as if hanging from an obelisk, symbol of immortality. On the right, the politician and master of the Royal Mint, John Conduit, is treated in a similar fashion, with his medal being put in place by an angel. Dynastic series of medals also have a long history, and one that is not confined to small-scale medals or even to 3 dimensions. In Syon House in West London, a house with some grand interiors designed by Robert Adam in the 1760s for the Duke of Northumberland, medals abound in various forms. And here you can see some painted examples in the long gallery. These form a series that show the Earls and Dukes of Northumberland and Somerset going back to Charlemagne, from whom they claim descent. Now, one could go on with many examples, but that is in fact the point. Not only in painting, sculpture, architecture, furniture, but in bookbindings, the borders of maps, and many other contexts, medals are a constantly referring feature, for they offer a concise way of giving added meaning to another work. This has provided many further opportunities for people to experience medals and assimilate them into their worldview. And those characteristics that I have identified that may have served to hold medals back could also enhance the experience of those who came into contact with them. If the circle can cause uncertainty, an uncertainty that is buried deep within the subconscious, to rise to the surface, this can soon be dissipated as the element of time, a result of the medal's two-sidedness, and wonder at being admitted to another world take hold. The final point that I wish to make, my final point regarding the positive aspects of medals, concerns their durability as physical objects. As has been recognised ever since the time of the earliest medals, their metallic form and their production as multiples means that they are likely to last. This medal of Pope Leo X gives rise to an intriguing thought in this respect. The reverse legend, "With glory and honour you have crowned me," is taken from the Psalms, where it is humanity that has been crowned by being placed only a little lower than angels and above animals. As here, the message in the psalm is addressed to God, but on the medal it is personalised. It is not humanity that is the me of the medal, but rather, as the effigy on the other side makes clear, the Pope. Can we be sure then about who exactly is the you? The message is being communicated through the medal. Without the medal, it would not exist. It is as if the words are being spoken by the Pope to the medal. It is the medal that is offering glory and honour. If here it is as if the subject of the medal is addressing the medal, sometimes it appears as if the medal itself is speaking. This reverse of a medal of an otherwise unknown man, Antonio Bossi, has a figure of fame holding a trumpet. The legend reads, "I never die." The intended speaker is, of course, fame, but it could equally well be interpreted as the medal itself. And indeed, in this case, it would be highly appropriate, for nothing now is known of Bossi, and were it not for the medal, he would be totally forgotten. "I never die" concisely and actually asserts the power of the medal. And a similar point might be made here. Little is known of Francesco Lomellini, and even on the medal itself he is described solely in terms of his relations. He is, we are told, the son of Davide and the brother of Cardinal Benedetto Lomellini. The anvil and the legend Durabo indicates endurance, but what he had to endure we do not know. Durare means to endure, to continue, to remain, and certainly the medal has endured, and has therefore fulfilled the pledge inscribed upon it. In this way, it may be said that medals are not illustrations of ideas, but embodiments. Concepts such as durability and longevity are expressed by the very physicality of the medal, and their handheld nature creates a very personal relationship that gives the medal an amuletic quality. Characteristics that may have added to the uncertainty with which medals have been received also add to their efficacy. The circle within which the portrait is contained elevates it to a different, one might say, a celestial plane, and this is why, as we have noticed, they are so often found on funerary monuments. In an article published in the periodical Arrêtus in 1928, the French scholar Pierre Depesel argued for, quote, the aristocratic character of the art of the medalist. The medals that he was thinking of and that he and his colleagues were promoting were cast medals produced in small editions. But medals are also, as one might say, democratic. Everyone nowadays knows, or thinks they know, what a medal is. For the majority of people, it may be a sporting or military award. For this audience, it may be something different. But this is not, I think, a problem to be overcome in the way that Pierre Depesel saw it. As ever, medals are flexible. They are diverse in their form and function, and there are widely diverging views concerning the place they occupy in today's world. And I'm pleased to say that I see no sign that this is set to change. Thank you very much.
Usiamo sempre lo stesso microfono così siamo sicuri che funziona. Grazie Philip per il tuo intervento e ci ha offerto una panoramica molto ampia e soprattutto una visione anche diversa rispetto a quello insomma, che è l'abitudine dello studio che siamo abituati a fare in Italia. Lo ringrazio molto. Vi presento adesso Jeremy Warren, che molti non lo sanno, ma per molti anni è stato vostro concittadino, perché ha vissuto a Bergamo per tanto tempo. È inglese, è stato curatore delle collezioni di scultura dell'Ashmolean Museum di Oxford e Academic Director della Wallace Collection di Londra, musei per i quali ha redatto i vastissimi cataloghi delle sculture, soprattutto in bronzo, ma in generale delle sculture che abbiamo in biblioteca, sono dei cataloghi fondamentali, pubblicati tra il 2014 e il 2016. È membro dell'Accademia delle Arti del Disegno di Firenze, ed è autore di fondamentali studi sulla placchetta, ma in generale sulla scultura italiana e non solo. Adesso è curatore della ricerca relativa alle opere di scultura della National Trust inglese. Ci parlerà del genere della placchetta, quindi voltiamo pagina. Prego Jeremy.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you so much for your kind invitation to this wonderful day. Now, as Philip has just said, everyone knows or think they know what a medal is. But if you were to stand in the entrance of great museums of Renaissance art, the Bargello, the Louvre, the Victorian Albert Museum, and asked visitors what they understood by the word placchette, placchetta in Italian, I suspect that the great majority would look puzzled. thanks to the extraordinary new gift by Dr. Mario Scaglia, future visitors to Bergamo and the Accademia Carrara will have no excuse for not encountering and discovering plaquettes in all their variety and beauty. The arrival in this great museum of Mario Scaglia's extraordinary gift of his world-class collection, their beautiful display in your galleries, and very intelligent display, and the study resources that Mario's gift has made possible. Now, all of this means that visitors to the Carrara now have unparalleled opportunities to learn more about and appreciate these remarkable but little understood works of art. The Scaglia donation will also, I think, stimulate interest well beyond Bergamo. So I hope today in this brief talk to show you how and why plaquettes, in their perhaps rather modest way, are a truly unique Renaissance art form. And in the slides I'll show you, unless indicated, all the plaquettes I'll be showing you are from the Scaglia collection in the Accademia Carrara. So these objects, and you have a little selection here, really do open a window into the Renaissance world. Works, religious works, mythological works, works after the antique, such as the little plaquette of Pan or Attila in the center. Often beautiful and imaginative, plaquettes are one of several types of object that suddenly appear in the Quattrocento, flourish for 50, perhaps 100 years, and then just as suddenly vanish from the scene, at least in their pure Renaissance form. In this way, we can compare plaquettes, for example, to high Renaissance Roman cardinals' seals, objects that are not so distant from plaquettes, which flourished for perhaps 40 or 50 years. Or indeed to two highly distinctive and brief-lived art forms, Pastiglia caskets, probably made in Ferrara, or the remarkable enameled copper vessels, traditionally believed to be made in Venice, which I believe might have been made in Florence. So what is a plaquette? In essence, they are small sculptural reliefs of differing shapes and sizes, usually made from bronze, but also made from lead or even silver. Now, the term plaquette is in fact a quite modern construct. It was invented in Paris in the later 19th century by two French scholars, the dealer Eugène Pillot and Émile Molinier, who at that time was a curator working in the Louvre Museum. Pillot first used the word in 1878 in an essay written on les médailles, les médaillons et les plaquettes de la Renaissance. And then 8 years later, in 1886, Molinier published his two-volume Les bronzes de la Renaissance, les plaquettes. This groundbreaking catalogue raisonné is still today a fundamental text for anyone studying the subject. It's not surprising that the genre of the plaquette should have been invented in France, since for much of the 19th century, Paris was the center of the market for Renaissance art. And it was also the city where many of the greatest private collections of Renaissance paintings, sculptures, and works of art were to be found. And so also the first great modern collections of plaquettes, as we can see from Molinier's catalogue, which constantly refers to objects in Parisian private collections. Looking more deeply at the term plaquette, and we've just seen a lot of medals, so you're very familiar with them. And although this might seem an obvious point to make, a plaquette is not a medal. Plaquettes are almost always one-sided objects, whereas medals, as we've seen, usually have two sides, an obverse and a reverse. And secondly, plaquettes hardly ever bear inscriptions. In the case of this wonderful work by Moderno, there's plenty of space for an inscription, but the artist has chosen not to use it. So they do not share the commemorative function of medals, although sometimes they can be allegorical in the way that medals are. One very rare exception to this rule, and it shows how rare it is a rather late plaquette in the Scaglia collection, produced in 1721 by the Florentine-born sculptor Agostino Cornacchini, who at that time was working in Rome, making the colossal marble sculpture of Charlemagne, Carlo Magno, for the Basilica of St. Peter's. And the inscription on the reverse of this plaquette refers to Cardinal Ludovico Sergardi, superintendent of works for the Basilica, and therefore responsible for overseeing the production of Cornacchini's sculpture. Luckily for us, the Cardinal writes about this plaquette in a letter and how it had come about. And he explains that Cornacchini had made un piccolo bassorilievo di metallo della statua equestre e suo ornato, fatto in Brescia per cavare la curiosità di molti che si interrogano sopra quest'opera. So Sergardi's comment helpfully leads us on to two fundamental questions about plaquettes: terminology and their function or purpose. The Cardinal described Cornacchini's relief as a basso rilievo, which is a typical way of describing plaquettes, but also many other types of sculpted relief from the 16th through to the 19th centuries. One of the earliest inventories to include plaquettes was that of 1489, listing a small collection of works of art assembled by Fra Franceschino da Cesena, librarian of the Biblioteca Malatestiana in Cesena. This inventory describes a number of objects that must have been plaquettes, using a variety of terms, such as piastra or quadretto. For example, un quadretto de piombo cum uno ercolo s'uso del relevo, perhaps something like this work by Moderno, of whom we'll hear more later. Now, very confusingly, Fra Franceschino's inventory elsewhere uses the term medaglie for what must have been plaquettes, and this is a practice unfortunately found in many other early inventories. One entry, for example, in the 1540 to 42 inventory of the Gonzaga collections in the Palazzo Ducale Mantova, described medaglie de bronzo, piombo, ramo e ottone, et altri metalli, antiche et moderne, tonde e quadre, grande, piccole e piccolissime, in tutto 1393. Now, very typical of the generalized way in which plaquettes and medals were often described, these nearly 1,400 objects clearly included many plaquettes, but very sadly we have no more information and we can only speculate as to what they were. So, more usefully, what was the function of plaquettes? What were they used for? Eugène Pio suggested in his essay that plaquettes were essentially copies of goldsmiths' models, made so as to preserve successful or precious working models. And this is true up to a point. In the museum of the Cathedral of Cividale in Friuli is a very beautiful pax, given in 1558 to the cathedral by Cardinal Giovanni Grimani, Patriarch of Aquileia. The central panel of the pax, this remarkable scene of the entombment, is much earlier and the work of an unknown early 16th century Venetian goldsmith. And it carries at the bottom, I hope you can see, the arms of Cardinal Domenico Grimani, who died in 1523. And the silver panel is recorded in a Grimani inventory from 1528. Now, in this case, a very small number of bronze plaquette casts, such as the one on the right, are known, probably taken from the goldsmith's model. But, on the other hand, it is clear that Pio's definition was in fact too narrow, failing to take account of the many uses that were made of plaquettes in daily life. The sculpture specialist, Sir John Pope Hennessy, gave a memorable definition of these multiple functions. He wrote, "Plaquettes were part of the fabric of Renaissance life. If you wrote a letter, the box from which you took your pen might have a plaquette on the lid. As likely as not, the inkstand would also be decorated with plaquettes. And your pounce box, that is a box for sand, would again be ornamented with reliefs. You might wear one in your cap or round your neck, and there might be another on the pommel of your dagger or your sword. In the room in which you slept, there could have been a lamp with a placchette of a sacrifice to Cupid or Priapus on the lid. And alongside it might have stood one of those small bronze tabernacles with a placchette of the Pietà, or the Virgin and Child. This description is such an evocative way into the world of plaquettes and their presence in daily life. But it does not cover all their uses. Plaquettes were also used as models to decorate the covers of book bindings or to embellish arms and armor. And they continue to serve as models over a long period of time and also are sometimes adapted according to need and fashion. A fascinating set of 4 gilt bronze openwork panels in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, thanks again to the generosity of Mario Scaglia, must once have adorned a small box or casket, the body of which would have been made from wood. The panels would have been set onto a coloured background, perhaps a blue or red velvet fabric, against which, with their bright gilding and silvering, they would have stood out impressively. Now, the original lost casket must have been a grander version of a type of wooden box made in vast numbers to hold jewels or cosmetics, the sort of objects that hardly survive today. And for the decoration of these boxes, cheaper materials such as gesso were generally used. And for models for the decoration, extensive use was clearly made of both medals and plaquettes. Pietro Aretino wrote in 1545 of his amusement at having seen in some Venetian shop caskets adorned with his portrait, flanked by images of Caesar and Alexander, almost certainly cast from modern plaquettes. In the case of the Ashmolean panels, the central images depict 4 young men and women, and these are all cast from known medals made in Lombardy or Emilia-Romagna in the period from around 1550 to 1580. But the figural elements on each side of the medallions are adapted from a range of plaquette designs, both Italian and German, dating from around 1460 to 1580. None of the subjects, either the medals or the plaquettes, have been chosen with any particular reason, except as portraits of fashionable, good-looking young men and women, whilst the plaquette designs have been adapted so as to create gently humorous effects. So note, for example, in the top right, how the centaurs and sea monsters seem to charge towards the men and women in the medallions. In another panel, the 2 seated boys on either side of the portrait medallion of Laura Gonzaga Trivulzio are copied from a late 15th century plaquette, an allegory of love. For the casket panel, their positions have been reversed, so that now the boys grin naughtily at each other across the portrait of the attractive young woman. Plaquettes were, of course, also made for their own sake, as small independent works of art, something that could be worn as a pendant from your neck, or simply displayed on a wall or a table. This superb version of Donatello's Virgin and Child with candelabra in the Scaglia collection has not 1 but 2 holes at the top. I hope you can see that. And that would have enabled it to hang straight on a wall or from a little rail, as we see in the illustration on the right from the prayer book of Matthias Schwarz, made in Augsburg in 1521. Or indeed in that famous painting in Florence of a Wunderkammer cabinet, the Scarabottolo. When did the story of plaquettes begin? As with so much of the art of the Renaissance, it emerges out of Renaissance man's love affair with antiquity, the worlds of ancient Greece and Rome. The earliest makers of plaquettes would certainly have been aware of the innovations of their contemporary medallists, such as Pisanello. However, the first plaquettes were really simply casts taken from ancient gems. In the Quattrocento, gems, small engraved or carved hardstones, became highly fashionable among collectors. As they still are today, they were true connoisseurs' objects, made to be studied privately and from close to. So the wealthiest men in Italy competed to collect these elite objects, which showed off their learning. Lorenzo de' Medici famously used his collection to promote his self-image by having his name engraved on his gems. And you can see here two of the best known, and I hope you can just see the inscription Laur Med on the right of the one on the left, and at the bottom underneath the base of a centaur. The most famous gems passed from one great collector to another. This cast in the Scaglia collection of the Apollo and Marsyas preserves the mount made for the gem by Lorenzo Ghiberti when it belonged to Cosimo de' Medici il Vecchio and was believed to have been the seal of the Emperor Nero. The gem later passed to another ferocious collector, the Venetian Cardinal Pietro Barbo, who from 1464 until his death in 1471 ruled as Pope Paul II. Note here how taking a cast from an intaglio gem, so that is an engraved gem, reverses the composition in the plaquette version, whereas for the centaur gem, which is carved in relief, the plaquette deriving from it runs in the same direction. Scholars continue to argue about which Italian center, Florence, Rome, or even Mantova, first saw the manufacture of bronze casts made from ancient gems, but almost certainly these early plaquettes were made in more than one place. It has, for example, been suggested that bronze casts, of which you see one in the Scaglia collection on the left, after the celebrated Felix gem, now in Oxford, were perhaps made in Mantova, since the gem was at one stage owned by the Mantuan Cardinal Francesco Gonzaga. But before Francesco, the Felix gem was in the collection of Paul II, Pietro Barbo. So the question becomes very difficult. We do know that Barbo set up within his Roman palace, Palazzo Venezia, a workshop that produced quite a number of the early casts after gems, and it seems some modern plaquettes too. During 19th century excavations in Palazzo Venezia, a terracotta matrix was discovered, which must have been used for the production of bronze casts of a plaquette with 5 young winged boys, or spiritelli, one wearing a grotesque mask. Many casts of this plaquette, including the one in the Scaglia collection on the left, have beveled or angled edges at the back, which shows you that they were made to be soldered together to form little triangular or rectangular inkstands, and you can see one below. With its mischievous small children, who remind us of Donatello's Spiritelli on the Prato pulpit, this small relief is full of the excitement of the early Renaissance. But it also reminds you powerfully of the many putti to be found in the art of ancient Rome. During what we might call the golden age of the Renaissance plaquette, from around 1450 to 1540, the spirit of the antique world is always present, even in the most apparently Christian subjects. Returning to Donatello's Virgin and Child, the subject may be Christian, but the composition is a conscious exercise in classicism. The Virgin Mary wears a sleeved form of the ancient Greek dress known as a chiton, while her head, which is shown in strict profile, is covered with a veil in the style of the palla, a headdress worn by Roman women as a sign of modesty. Both mother and child have halos, but these are so small as to be hardly noticeable, and certainly when you compare them to the magnificent candelabra in the antique style, placed on either side of the altar-like parapet. The spirit of the ancient world can also be expressed in plaquettes through subject matter. And this can be clearly seen in the work of two major plaquette artists, who between them have been given, I'm afraid by art historians, what must be two of the most discouragingly obscure names in the whole of art history, the pseudo Fra Antonio da Brescia and the master IOFF. Pseudo Fra Antonio got his name through comparison with a medalist from Brescia called Fra Antonio, but there is little in common between this artist's medals and the highly accomplished plaquettes produced by an unknown master who probably worked in Venice in the years around 1500. The abundance and asceta is a fascinating mix of the antique and the modern. The nymph carries a cornucopia, the ancient symbol of abundance, whilst the little satyr blowing on his trumpet and the altar to the left are derived from Roman models. But the towers and other buildings on the distant skyline are those of a modern Renaissance city, whilst the languidly reclining nymph immediately reminds you of the female nudes of Giorgione and Tiziano, or of this image of Venus approached by Cupid by Palmavecchio. Pseudo Fra Antonio, whoever he was, also seems to have used contemporary prints as models, notably in his allegory of vice and virtue, which is almost identical to an engraving by the Venetian printmaker Benedetto Montagna. What is the exact relationship here? Did the print precede the plaquette? Probably, but can we be sure? Could they have been made around the same time in different Venetian workshops, one capitalizing on the success of the other? In the case of the monogrammist IOFF, there are also connections with prints and printmakers, especially prints based on nelle, a particular type of engraved plates in which the incised parts are filled with a special blackened mixture. This particular art form flourished in Bologna, where IOFF is most likely to have worked, and there was a flourishing humanist culture around the ancient university. The plaquette of Ariadne on Naxos in the middle is also known in the form of niello prints, whilst Prudence, in an allegorical plaquette you see on the right, seems to be derived from the niello by Pellegrino da Cesena, who worked in Bologna. The beautiful plaquette with a half-naked girl surrounded by wild bacchantes is most likely to represent Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos of Crete, who fled to the island of Naxos with her lover Theseus, who then cruelly abandoned her. Ariadne was happily rescued by Bacchus, god of wine, and the couple married. The plaquette seems to be a vivid depiction of the moment in the story when Bacchus's followers first come across the grieving Ariadne. Within its tiny compass, and of course you can see it in the gallery, but it's about that wide, about 6 centimeters diameter, the plaquette captures brilliantly the savage nature of the satyrs and bacchantes, but also the fear of Ariadne, abandoned alone with these wild creatures swirling noisily around her. We saw earlier this impressive early 16th century portrait of a young man proudly showing off his sword. Within the pommel at the top of the hilt of the sword may be seen a plaquette, I hope you can see it on the left, depicting Mucius Scaevola, the Roman hero who, to prove his honor, thrust his hand into an open fire. Most of IOFF's known plaquettes are in fact found in just two basic shapes, circular, as with the Ariadne on Naxos we just saw, or shield-shaped, as here. They seem to have been specifically designed for use with sword pommels, a few of which fortunately survive. The Ariadne on Naxos, which is often paired with the allegory of Prudence, or another design, the Judgment of Paris, because of course on your sword pommel you had to have two plaquettes, one on each side, was a common subject for insertion into these lobed pommels. And you can see a surviving one on a complete sword in Brescia in the centre, and another may just be seen in a rather damaged painting by Timoteo Viti in the Brera, Milan, painted around 1495 to 1500, so very useful for dating these objects. Now, 5 different designs of a shield-shaped plaquettes are known currently, and I show you 3 of them here from the Scaglia collection. One can be seen in the portrait of a young man, and there's his pommel again. But there is also a single surviving pommel in Bologna, which shows how the lobed frame was carefully designed to show off the plaquette to best effect. And these plaquettes used in sword pommels would generally also have been gilded for even greater impact. All of the 5 known plaquettes in this series recount stories from Roman history, as told by the great historian Tito Livio in his Ab Urbe Condita. Very suitable subjects for wealthy young men wanting to feel that they too were as courageous and honourable as their heroes from ancient Rome. The anonymous young man in this portrait by Bartolomeo Veneto shows off his sword pommel, again embellished with the Mucius Scevra design, this time circular in form. But he also wears a superb hat badge, another type of accessory that relates very closely to plaquettes. So IOFF really is one of the most fascinating but mysterious figures in the history of the plaquette, and a number of attempts have been made to identify him. Marco Collereta and I independently came across a passage in a poem written by the Bolognese humanist Giovanni Filoteo Accademia, completed in 1504, published in 1513, and called Il Viridario. In it, Accademia praises a sculptor he calls Giovan Francesco, who, he writes, excelled in the casting of reliefs in circular form, in medium and low relief. And he wrote, Nella scultura un c'è che ogni altro eccelle, d'ogni rilievo tondo mezzo o basso, tante opere ha fatte, ben fondate e belle. So, quite good, I think. From the surviving evidence, the most probable candidates for Accademia's Giovanni Francesco are 2 goldsmiths working in Bologna around 1500, Gianfrancesco di Boggio and Francesco Fornio. But we know nothing about their work, nothing survives. So much gold and silver from the Renaissance is now lost that it is difficult for us to appreciate the crucial role that goldsmiths and silversmiths played in the artistic life of almost every Italian centre. But plaquettes, with their intricate miniature designs, are just the sorts of objects that you would expect trained goldsmiths to excel in making. The artist known as Moderno, arguably the greatest maker of plaquettes, was almost certainly a goldsmith, and he's probably identifiable with Galeazzo Mondella, a goldsmith from Verona. Mondella's life is a little better known than most makers of plaquettes. He even receives a short mention in Vasari's Life of the Artists. And Vasari claimed that Moderno went to France, and interestingly, we do find a whole series of reproductions of his plaquettes on early 16th century French buildings. So maybe he did take his plaquettes designs with him. We're very fortunate because 3 works in precious metal by Moderno do survive, and they help us to understand how, as Pio suggested, many, if not all, plaquettes had their origins in objects made in precious metal. A beautiful pax was given by Cardinal Sigismondo Gonzaga to the Cathedral of Mantova in 1513, whilst the central design, in silver in the pax, survives in the form of numerous plaquette casts, including one superb version in the Scaglia collection. The other works are Moderno's recognized masterpieces, 2 large reliefs in gilded silver that once adorned a cabinet belonging to Giovanni Grimani in Venice. The reliefs, however, were made much earlier in the 16th century, probably to the commission of Giovanni's uncle Domenico Grimani, whom we met earlier commissioning the entombment relief. Elite collectors such as Grimani would have immediately recognized that the figure of Christ in the Laocoon, in the flagellation, is based on the antique statue of a Laocoon that had been discovered as recently as 1506. So you can think with these plaquettes made perhaps around 1510, they were very, very up to date in terms of archaeological discoveries. Casts of Moderno's flagellation quickly began to be made and survive in quite large numbers, evidence of the impact of this powerful design. For the relief with the Sacra Conversazione, on the other hand, plaquette casts are much rarer, and almost all those that survive date from the 19th century. Around 45 plaquettes are reliably attributed to Moderno, 12 of them signed by him in all or some examples, including the flagellation relief. You can just see the signature on the base below Christ. Moderno's work displays a wide subject range. He made several religious plaquettes, including a series of upright scenes with episodes from Christ's life and death. Now, these come across as really monumental works on this artificial means of PowerPoint. And they demonstrate Moderno's ability to create really complex compositions on the tiny scale of a plaquette. So the entombment on the left is just about 10 centimeters tall, and the crucifixion a little more, about 11 centimeters. There are also scenes from Roman history, designed like IOFF's plaquettes for use in sword pommels, as we can see in a painting by Cima da Corneliano. But the majority of Moderno's works are mythological in subject matter, and these include the large circular plaquette of Phaeton, which we saw earlier, many depictions of a hero Hercules, famous for his legendary strength. An especially interesting group of 4 small reliefs recount episodes from Hercules' struggles against 2 mythical giants, Geryon and Cacus. And in the 3rd plaquette in this sequence, Cacus has changed form into a centaur. These subjects are all quite obscure, but they create a coherent sequence. And you could well imagine that the designs might have originated in silver casts for panels on a small casket, like the one in the bottom left in the Victoria and Albert Museum, with plaquettes by the anonymous Coriolanus master. And it's been suggested that Moderno might have made a casket like this for a modern Hercules, Ercole d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, where Moderno is known to have worked. The Este in Ferrara enjoyed close dynastic and cultural links with the Gonzagas in Mantova. And another notable feature of a Hercules plaquettes, and you can see it on, I think, 3 of the 4 plaquettes here, is that all 4 are found in some examples signed by Moderno. What does this nickname Moderno, the modern one, really mean? Well, the name must have been created through some form of competition or perhaps collaboration with the Mantuan court sculptor Pier Jacopo Allari Bonacolsi, who had his own sobriquet, Antico, the ancient one. And this is more understandable, perhaps, since almost all of Antico's known works are small copies after ancient Roman and Greek sculptures. And both Antico's Venus Felix on the left and Moderno's Mars and Victory plaquette are derived from antique prototypes, in both cases quite loosely. So, looking at these images, what might have made Bonacolsi call himself Antico and Mondella Moderno? It's a difficult question to answer. But if we take the Mars and Victory and Moderno's astonishing depiction of the resurrection of Christ, we can see, I think, how a forward-looking dynamism runs through this brilliant artist's work. The figures of Christ and Victory are curiously similar in their extraordinary vigor, and Christ seems almost to leap out from the tomb. And where is victory, dragging Mars along with her, running towards? Why does she look behind her? The soldiers around the tomb, they are bizarrely naked except for their shields, but they are brilliant exercises in the observation of human reactions to a sudden, unexpected event. Unlike the beautiful but rather stiff creations of Antico, Moderno, working on a very much smaller scale, except for Antico's medals, one of which you saw in Philip's talk, in my view displays inventive genius and a real awareness of the revolutionary changes in art that in the years around 1500 were leading towards the high Renaissance of Michelangelo and Raffaello. Like Antico, the Paduan sculptor Andrea Briosco, better known as Riccio, made small bronze statuettes of surpassing beauty. But Riccio was also a master of the placchette. No Renaissance artist had perhaps such an empathy with the wild, savage, ancient world of satyrs, satyresses, and vengeful gods. Most of Riccio's clients and friends were to be found among the scholars and professors at the University of Padua, a centre at this time for advanced humanist thought. Indeed, so advanced that the abbot of the Basilica of the Santo in Padua once complained to the Venetian Senate that the university had become nothing less than, as he described it, a school for pagans. Many of Riccio's plaquettes, such as the Allegory of Fame in the centre, are full of obscure meanings that would have appealed to his friends, the university professors. But these professors, despite their pagan tendencies, also helped to oversee the Santo and other major churches in Padua, for which Riccio also worked. His entombment is a masterpiece of religious sculpture on a small scale. The body of Christ is surrounded by a dense crowd, including two men in contemporary dress at the far left. In this theatrical scene, groups of grieving women in the foreground, left and right, frame the central image, the body of Christ. His open left hand, with the mark of a nail in the palm, is opened to the spectator, inviting our active participation, whilst the crowds behind seem to push him forward towards us, the audience. In Italian, the name Riccio, of course, refers to the spiky animal we know in English as a hedgehog. And portraits of the sculptor indeed show that he had a full head of crinkly hair. A group of fine plaquettes, very close to Riccio in style, are signed ulocrino, from the Greek word for, yes, crinkly hair. And scholars argue whether ulocrino was also Riccio or some associate, perhaps one of his brothers. And I was rather pleased to see that Julia has labelled the St. Jerome in the gallery as Riccio, which I think is probably right. And they are wonderful, wonderful things. Now, the golden age of the plaquette did in a way end with the deaths of Moderno in 1528 and Riccio in 1532. It continued for a while to flourish as an art form, but became increasingly rather different, often larger in size, and in the age of the Counter-Reformation, with a greater proportion of religious subject matter. The great Milanese sculptor Leone made 3 plaquettes celebrating the Genoese admiral Andrea Doria and his nephew Giannattino, but these are one-offs in his work. 2 other great artists in the early 16th century, Valerio Belli and Giovanni Bernardi, worked mainly as goldsmiths and gem engravers. And the plaquettes cast from their works in rock crystal and other hard stones, in a sense, return us to the world of those early casts after antique gems. Perhaps the last great maker of plaquettes in Italy was Guglielmo della Porta, who worked mainly in Rome. And della Porta designed a series of 16 quite extraordinarily fluid and vivid scenes from Ovid's Metamorphoses, for use as panels in furniture, such as cabinets, which became another use for plaquettes, especially as they started to become larger from around 1550 onwards. And like Riccio, della was also a great religious artist, producing a fine entombment, you see on the left, and a deeply moving image of the Pietà, the success of which was such that it was copied in literally hundreds of derivations, even by artists as great as El Greco. And in a sense, with this Pietà, the plaquette had arrived, but you can, I'm sure, see that these works are very different to those from 50 or 80 years before. Now, there are many more wonderful plaquettes in the Scaglia collection that I would have loved to show you today in this brief talk. I had no time to mention the plaquette in Northern Europe, which is very important, but deserves a lecture to itself. But thanks to Mario Scaglia's great donation, everyone visiting the Accademia Carrara in the future will now be able to explore the world of the plaquette, as well, of course, as that of medals, with which there are so many connections. I hope today I've been able to demonstrate that the plaquette really is a unique phenomenon that could only have been created during that explosive burst of creative energy that is the Renaissance in Italy. And I hope you will also agree with me that, if not perhaps a whole chapter in the story of art in Renaissance Italy, plaquettes certainly deserve more than a simple footnote. Thank you very much.
Grazie Jeremy per questa panoramica vastissima del mondo della placchetta, oggetti, artisti, sì, dove preferisci? Oggetti, artisti, tecniche e soprattutto funzioni, che forse è una delle necessità che ci sono di più anche in museo, cioè cercare di spiegare a che cosa servissero questi oggetti. Sì, perfetto, benissimo, sì. Adesso vi mostriamo una breve video intervista che abbiamo fatto all'ingegner Scaglia nei mesi passati. Gli abbiamo fatto vincere la sua ritrosia, ma volevamo insomma una testimonianza della sua storia di collezionista. Abbiamo montato assieme 3 interviste che gli abbiamo fatto io, la direttrice Cristina Lodeschini e Davide Gasparotto, che è il senior curator dei dipinti del Museum Getty di Los Angeles e che conosce Mario da tantissimi anni. E le abbiamo montate insieme per creare un po' una storia del Mario Scaglia collezionista.
Ingegnere, siamo nella bella sala del 400 Veneto, che non presenta però solo pittura, su cui si affacciano 2 vetrine con alcune placchette della sua collezione, la sala che presenta una selezione della sua collezione di medaglie di placchette, ma anche di paci, di crocifissi, e da un'altra parte invece abbiamo una selezione della collezione Zeri. Ma quello che io volevo chiederle è quando ha iniziato a frequentare la Carrara e quando è stata la sua prima volta.
Dunque, l'anno dell'immissione della Carrara nei beni del comune di Bergamo è del 58. Io credo prima del 58. Perché mi ricordo che c'era il segretario giù.
Lei ha assunto nel tempo, oltre a questa passione per l'arte, ha assunto dei ruoli di responsabilità. Entra nel consiglio dell'Accademia Carrara, ne diviene presidente dal 1980 al 1993, quindi un tempo lungo. Ma questa cosa com'è accaduta? E lei come l'ha interpretata?
No. Io ero reduce, ma io ho sempre sentito la passione anche, sì, ma il dovere anche di dedicarmi al pubblico, alla comunità. Così.
Il senso era quello dell'assunzione anche di responsabilità?
La responsabilità è proprio quella che dà che dà peso all'impegno, perché se manca la responsabilità, la volontà è importante, è il sale dell'impegno, insomma.
All'inizio degli anni 70 arriva un nuovo direttore giovane, molto brillante, intraprendente, Francesco Rossi,
Nel
73.
Ecco, io l'ho trovato già qui.
Ed era un passaggio molto interessante, perché la direzione di questo complesso, che prevede il museo e l'Accademia di Belle Arti, aveva un direttore, in quel caso era Longaretti, che aveva la reggenza di entrambe le istituzioni, che nascono insieme, hanno origini comuni, e invece nel 73 si decide di avere un direttore per la Pinacoteca,
Sì.
viene nominato Francesco.
Si fece un concorso ed
è il primo direttore dell'Accademia Carrara. Lei ha avuto un rapporto molto intenso con Francesco Rossi, anche di grande amicizia.
Amicizia, di stima reciproca e di scontri continui. Litigavamo continuamente, no, perché effettivamente io col mio carattere un po' sanguigno, poi soprattutto appassionato, sicuramente aveva ragione lui quando mi accusava di invadere il campo delle sue competenze, perché alle volte mi permettevo magari di venire in pinacoteca e di fare delle osservazioni ai guardiani. Da parte sua c'era così una visione che non coincideva esattamente con la mia in tante piccole cose. Ecco, sicuramente che ci accomunava era la visione, la passione per l'istituzione, per la Carrara, e sicuramente l'onestà di intenti di entrambi.
Senti, parliamo un po' della tua grande passione, la più importante forse della tua attività come collezionista, quella per le medaglie, le placchette rinascimentali e barocche. Come hai cominciato? Cosa ti attira in questi oggetti? Come giudichi la qualità? Come è nato questo interesse? Come si è cresciuto e si è sviluppato nel tempo e ha portato poi alla creazione di questa collezione straordinaria che oggi è
Dunque, diversi fattori.
qui.
Primo, la frequentazione di Stefanoni, che già ho citato prima. Stefanoni aveva una raccolta di placchette quando io l'ho conosciuto, già quando faceva affari con uno o con l'altro, diceva, quelle cosette lì dalle a me, e se le faceva dare come sovrapprendere, e aveva fatto una bella collezione di paci e di placchette. Quindi lui già raccoglieva placchette. Io nel frattempo, da parte mia, qualcuna l'avevo già, però raccogliendo lui le placchette, le medaglie, lui aveva avuto le medaglie del fondo Löser, e delle medaglie del fondo Löser, quelle in bronzo le aveva vendute, ma aveva detto a Parigi, i piombi li aveva ancora tutti lui, per cui a me diede i piombi, me li praticamente regalò, perché allora il piombo già era motivo di cosa. Fra l'altro uno di questi piombi è qui in collezione, ed è un piombo molto bello di
Sperandio?
Bravo, di Sperandio.
Sperandio.
Sì, proprio di Sperandio di Mantova. È uno che viene dalla collezione Lusa. È uno di quei piombi lì. Ecco, quindi, e poi praticamente io segnalavo a Stefanoni le placchette sul mercato e lui dice, ma Mario, fai le medaglie tu. Io facevo le medaglie e lui mi segnalava ogni tanto le medaglie, la cosa è cominciata un po' così. E poi vi dirò che se andiamo da un punto di vista un po' più razionale della cosa, sono diversi fattori che mi hanno spinto a collezionare queste cose. Primo, il fatto che con somme per me possibili, si poteva mettere assieme una raccolta
certo,
di grandi autori.
Di prima qualità. Anche.
Di grande qualità. Per cui lì veramente si poteva eccellere. Sarebbe stato nei dipinti o nelle sculture, quello che non avrei potuto fare io. Invece lì, 4 gatti, sul mercato internazionale si poteva competere. Quindi quello è stato un altro fattore importante che mi ha convinto. E poi nelle medaglie, dirò, un senso che mai nessuno ha scritto su questo. Non so perché, ma noi, ecco, adesso qui ritorno al bergamasco, diciamo bergamaschi, questa passione per il ritratto. Perché se io penso alla collezione dei ritrattini che ho a Milano, alle medaglie, ai ritratti che ho collezionato, eccetera, questa passione per la figura, per il volto umano, che sicuramente ha giocato il suo ruolo. Per cui da lì, insomma, poi le placchette andavo avanti Stefanoni, io lo alimentavo. Quando Stefanoni è mancato, la raccolta di Stefanoni è confluita
della tua,
della mia raccolta, le acquistai tutte io, e per cui praticamente è venuto a formarsi questo concentrato di placchette e medaglie.
Hai parlato della passione per il ritratto, diciamo, allora vorrei un po' collegare quest'area della tua collezione, le placchette, le medaglie soprattutto, con il resto. E tu hai citato i ritratti di piccolo formato, poi ci sono i piccoli paesaggi, opere piccole, preziose, spesso supporti preziosi. Quindi come è nato questo interesse? Come si sono...
Ma io credo che sia automatico.
È stata una scelta consapevole?
Perché io vivo in una casa normale, borghese, con delle dimensioni normali, borghesi, e a un certo momento le superfici delle pareti sono quelle. Ecco, una delle ragioni che non ho detto, forse delle medaglie placchette, inconscia peraltro, è quella di avere in una piccola cassettiera, in un piccolo armadio, di avere centinaia di pezzi. Perché poi il collezionista è un essere strano, no, perché il collezionismo c'è da sempre, ma voglio dire fatto a modo suo, e ha bisogno di essere questa passione alimentata in ogni momento, per cui c'è questo desiderio, l'acquisizione, eccetera, eccetera, che deve poi trovare uno sfogo. E gli spazi, i volumi borghesi sono quelli che sono, per cui anche i quadri piccoli, sì certo, perché anzitutto io non posso vederli che da vicino, perché l'appartamento normale, le distanze di godimento sono quelle, gli spazi sono quelli, per cui e poi ecco, io sono un po' un preciso in queste cose, io amo, come dicevamo, le cose precise, ben conservate, per cui i quadri grandi, un po' sfatti, eccetera, non mi vanno, anche se ho qualche quadro grandino, ecco, grandissimo no, grandino sì.
Perché poi, diciamo, in qualche modo la tua origine lombarda, il tuo humus lombardo si riconosce nella raccolta, perché la pittura lombarda della realtà, abbiamo il Baschenis qui dietro, ha contato per te nella costruzione della tua raccolta.
Direi di sì, anche se io sono stato in fin dei conti un pasticcione, perché io ho sempre, praticamente sono stato un dilettante, diciamo così. Io ho sempre cercato il diletto, io mi sono divertito tutta la vita con questa passione, per cui ecco, diciamo specialista tra virgolette, forse lo sono un po' con i multipli rinascimentali, placchette e medaglie, ma però nel resto io ho sempre acquistato quel che mi piaceva, senza una finalità
forse come ogni collezionista hai cercato il diletto, hai cercato quello che ti piace, quello che ti dà piacere, quello che ti può circondare nella tua vita quotidiana, dandoti gioia e piacere, l'idea di guardare.
Proprio così.
E invece la sua prima asta, si ricorda? La sua prima asta?
La prima no, ma la prima asta importante è stata quella di Sotheby's per la collezione Chigi del 74 a Firenze. Quella è stata un'asta molto importante a cui io partecipai, però non avevo né la forza finanziaria né la conoscenza sufficiente per partecipare come avrei dovuto, tanto che molte medaglie mi sfuggirono, mi pare
forse una sola,
una sola
viene da quell'asta
cognata.
Piccola e coniata,
Cognata
sì,
veneziana.
Esatto. Poi però la storia ha preso una piega diversa, perché
poi dopo
le medaglie della
molte
collezione
sono rientrate per secondo, terzo, perché stiamo parlando, come vi dico, questo è il 74, ma io adesso non so dirvi esattamente, ma credo che cominciai a comprare placchette e qualche medaglia negli anni 60, sicuro, che sì.
Ma parliamo un po' appunto della collezione Chigi. La collezione Chigi è una collezione di origine seicentesca, l'inventario delle medaglie.
No, l'inventario
del guardaroba del palazzetto della Riccia è del 1674 e c'è un lungo elenco di medaglie che erano appunto di proprietà dei Chigi. La famiglia fa questa prima asta nel 74, una seconda nel 75 e poi in realtà le medaglie continuano a circolare sul mercato, perché lei ne ha trovate diverse tra aste, mercanti privati. Una di queste è uno forse degli acquisti più importanti della sua collezione, che è il busto di Matteo Barresi di Antonello.
Questa è un'altra storia però, perché
ci racconti com'è andata quella storia?
Questa è un'altra storia, diversa, perché dunque la famiglia Chigi vendette, non so se negli anni 60 o 60, allo Stato il Palazzo della Riccia e Castelli Romani, e nel Palazzo della Riccia erano contenute una collezione soprattutto di ritratti di famiglia e di quadri di famiglia, ma poi c'era anche dell'oggettistica. Allora, mentre i quadri rimasero col castello, mentre invece l'oggettistica è stata venduta, anzi una prima, non dico parte, qualche oggetto è stato venduto prima, per esempio proprio il pezzo che dice lei, che è questo del Barresi, era stato dato, diciamo, in pagamento parziale delle prestazioni di uno degli avvocati che avevano aiutato nella compravendita del Palazzo della Riccia. E quindi questo uscì da Palazzo Chigi, penso alla fine degli anni 60, e costui lo cedette a sua volta a un antiquario che lo aveva, ma non si sapeva chi fosse questo personaggio, perché la scritta è una scritta solamente accennata e molto sibillina. Però per me rappresentava un pezzo unico e eccezionale da un punto di vista qualitativo, un pezzo per cui gli ho sempre fatto la corte e riuscii a comprarlo senza veramente sapere di che si trattasse. Che sciolse l'enigma fu Francesco Rossi, che mi aveva fatto il catalogo delle placchette, perché gli avevo dato una fotografia, dico dottor Rossi, vedo un minutino se riesce, ed è riuscito a sciogliere l'enigma, a trovare chi era il personaggio.
E il mercato oggi com'è?
Ma il mercato oggi è praticamente inesistente, perché non c'è più materiale. Cioè il materiale, esiste del materiale, ma il materiale è molto molto raro di quantità, perché sono oggetti che già furono prodotti in quantità modeste, in quanto, prendiamo le medaglie rinascimentali. Ecco, chi ne faceva riprodurre più esemplari erano soprattutto i sovrani, che dovevano distribuire a sudditi in occasione di anniversari o roba del genere. Poi però c'era la piccola borghesia che faceva queste medaglie, le faceva fare unicamente come ricordo proprio, come oggi si fa una fotografia ricordo di qualcosa. E naturalmente, siccome poi allora la materia prima costava moltissimo, perché il bronzo era carissimo, e venivano riprodotti in pochi esemplari, per cui ne sono rimaste molto poche, per cui sono oggetti comunque rari, pur essendo dei multipli, sono oggetti comunque rari, e ormai sono tutti o nei musei o in qualche rara collezione privata che ormai sono pochissime, insomma, ecco.
Adesso la sua collezione di medaglie e placchette è interamente stata donata all'Accademia Carrara, e la sala dove ci troviamo è la sala dove è esposto il nucleo più consistente di oggetti. Sono, diciamo, forse neanche un 10% quelli esposti qui del totale. Abbiamo però scelto un tipo di allestimento molto flessibile, quindi non necessariamente saranno esposti questi oggetti per anni, ma potremmo modificare l'allestimento, e questo è stato anche un suggerimento che ci ha dato lei, perché questi oggetti devono essere mostrati, raccontati, e è necessario modificare le storie che andiamo a raccontare. A breve però arriverà in museo anche la sua biblioteca, e sarà allestita in una sala che c'è qui nel museo, una sala deposito, dove ci saranno il resto delle medaglie e delle placchette nella cassaforte, e ci sarà appunto la biblioteca, e quindi la possibilità per gli studiosi di studiare gli oggetti in un contesto di fonti importantissime per il lavoro. Ci racconti un po' di questa biblioteca, come è stata messa assieme?
È una biblioteca piccola ma estremamente specializzata su questi argomenti, cioè i multipli rinascimentali. Ci sono i libri di normale consultazione, e molti di questi sono molto rari, pur essendo di normale consultazione. Poi ci sono alcuni libri storici dal 500 in poi.
E poi ci sono i cataloghi d'asta.
E poi c'è una raccolta, questa sì importante, di cataloghi d'asta dall'inizio del secolo scorso fino ad oggi, in modo tale da poter verificare le provenienze. Cioè è il materiale che, nella mia visione, giusto o sbagliata che sia, però che è quella che mi ha indotto anche a chiedere ospitalità all'Accademia Carrara, nella mia visione può dare un senso completo alla cosa, perché l'Accademia Carrara sarà l'unico posto in Italia che avrà la possibilità di sviluppare questa nicchia piccolissima del sapere, però una nicchia dove hanno operato gli artisti più importanti dell'epoca, e dove praticamente c'è un legame molto stretto con la storia, sia la storia civile che la storia collezionistica. Per cui, essendo, dal mio punto di vista, la Carrara un museo del collezionismo, io penso che una nicchia così non sia sprecata, anche perché lo spazio che ho richiesto è veramente molto modesto, ecco, e resterà un posto unico, almeno in Italia, per questo.
Comunque, ecco, alla fine di tutto io devo ringraziare l'Accademia Carrara, perché mi ha dato un modo veramente di chiudere, l'ho detto varie volte, di chiudere un cerchio che ho iniziato, ma che qualsiasi altro modo che non fosse quello di riuscire a far partecipare il pubblico alle mie passioni sarebbe stato per me deludente. E invece l'Accademia Carrara mi ha permesso di mettere sul piatto perlomeno quello di cui io ho goduto e mi ha riempito la vita. Ecco, quindi questo io sono estremamente riconoscente all'istituzione. Sì.
Cristina, ti passo la parola per chiudere.
L'ingegnere non è stato facile farlo chiacchierare, e devo dire che però era un nostro desiderio per adesso e per il futuro Abbiamo un girato di 3 ore con lui e abbiamo fatto una sintesi di questi 20 minuti in cui lui si è raccontato, e penso in una maniera molto, molto piana, come sa fare lui, ma anche molto ricca e convincente. Allora, la nostra giornata si conclude con questo ritratto dell'ingegnere e naturalmente dicendo che questa è la prima di una serie che ogni anno con Giulio Zaccariotto e altri studiosi vi proporremo. Grazie a tutti.